The sun dipped low over the dusty streets of Redstone Creek in the year 1876, casting long, golden shadows across the wooden sidewalks. Life in the town moved slowly, like the creak of wagon wheels over the uneven dirt roads. And yet, even in the quietest corners, whispers could travel faster than a tumbleweed in the wind. And today, it seemed, all of Redstone Creek was buzzing with the same cruel rumor. They whispered that Clara Bennett wasn't pretty enough, that her eyes weren't bright enough, her smile too timid, her laugh too soft for a town like this. And yet, there she stood, her chin lifted despite the cruel stares, a stubborn flame in her chest refusing to bow to their judgment. Before we dive deeper into Clara's story, I have to ask, where are you watching from today? Drop your city and country in the comments. I'd love to know. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the journey ahead, because what happens in Redstone Creek is something you won't want to miss. Clara's days had always been simple, filled with chores and quiet walks along the creek behind her family's small homestead. But the weight of the town's whispers pressed on her like an unyielding shadow. Each sneer, each sidelong glance made her stomach twist with a mix of shame and stubborn defiance. But she was used to it. After all, the Bennett family had never been rich or influential. Their cabin, though sturdy and warm, was nothing compared to the grand facades of the merchants and ranchers who looked down their noses at her. Yet, the moment she first met Jackson Cole, everything began to change. He arrived in town like a force of nature, tall, rugged, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a voice that carried over the clamor of the street like a promise. When he first saw Clara standing by the general store, brushing dust from her skirt, he didn't see her as the town did. He didn't see what they whispered. He saw strength, resilience, and a kind of quiet beauty that no one in Redstone Creek had the eyes to recognize. The day they met, Jackson tipped his hat and smiled. A small, almost shy gesture that somehow managed to hold all the confidence of a man who had ridden through deserts and survived storms. "Name's Jackson," he said, and somehow, just hearing it made Clara feel a spark she hadn't known existed. It wasn't just attraction, it was acknowledgement. Someone who truly saw her. From that day forward, wherever Clara went, she noticed Jackson lingering on the edges, watching out for her in subtle, unassuming ways. He would carry water for her pail when their paths crossed, or casually walk alongside her on errands, just close enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence. But the town didn't change its tune. The whispers followed her like a shadow, growing louder every day. And Clara, for all her resilience, couldn't help but feel the sting. The tension between what the town thought she deserved and what Jackson seemed to see in her built slowly, like a storm gathering on the horizon. And then one evening, as the sun bled into shades of crimson over the creek, everything came to a head. Clara had been fetching eggs from the barn when a group of townsfolk began their cruel comments, loud enough for anyone passing by to hear. Laughter mixed with snide remarks, and Clara's heart sank as she stood frozen, unsure how to respond. And then Jackson appeared, as if summoned by the very injustice itself. His presence was commanding, protective, and calm all at once. He stepped between Clara and the crowd, eyes blazing with quiet intensity. He didn't shout, didn't accuse, but his gaze alone made the whispers falter. He leaned slightly closer to Clara and murmured, "They don't see what I see. Your beauty to me." The words weren't loud, but they cut through the noise like a clear bell. The townsfolk shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes, others muttering under their breath. But for Clara, it was as if the weight of every cruel word she had endured lifted from her shoulders. She felt lighter, seen, and for the first time, untouchable by their judgment. As the shadows lengthened and the town quieted for the evening, Clara and Jackson walked side by side down the empty streets of Redstone Creek. She glanced at him, curiosity and gratitude mingling in her gaze. "Why me?" she asked softly. Jackson tipped his hat, his smile just a fraction of the warmth that filled his eyes. "Because you're real," he said simply. "Because you're strong. Because I see you when no one else does." And in that moment, the whispers of the town faded into nothingness, replaced by a silence that was almost sacred. But this was only the beginning. Redstone Creek was a town full of judgment and secrets, and their connection, as fragile and tender as it was, would soon be tested in ways Clara could never have imagined. Challenges were coming, storms of the heart and of circumstance, and Clara would have to decide whether she could trust someone who dared to see her true worth when the whole town refused to. And so begins their story, the story of whispered cruelties, of small acts of courage, of hearts daring to meet in a world that often tells you you're not enough. Stay with us, because the ride through Redstone Creek has just begun. The next morning, Redstone Creek woke slowly under a pale, misty sun, the kind that made the wooden storefronts glisten as though sprinkled with silver dust. Clara rose before the dawn, the words Jackson had whispered the evening before still echoing in her mind. They weren't just words. They were a lifeline, a quiet rebellion against the judgment that had plagued her for years. She dressed quickly, the fabric of her simple dress brushing against her skin like a reminder that she could carry herself with pride, no matter what anyone said. She made her way to the small market square, the town just beginning to stir. Merchants opened their stalls, the smell of fresh bread mingled with the dust of the street, and the clang of the blacksmith's hammer rang in the distance. Clara felt a small thrill as she walked, head held a little higher than usual, knowing that Jackson would be somewhere nearby. And sure enough, as she reached the edge of the square, she spotted him leaning casually against the railing of the saloon porch, eyes scanning the morning activity, always searching, always watching. "Morning, Clara," he called, tipping his hat. His voice carried easily across the square, firm and gentle all at once. "Morning, Mr. Cole," she replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. Her heart fluttered at the sound of his voice, as if it had the power to chase away the lingering shadows of the town's cruel whispers. They began walking together, a quiet companionship forming between them, filled with unspoken understanding. Clara noticed the way Jackson's eyes lingered on her, as if memorizing every detail. The way her hair caught the light, the subtle tilt of her jaw, the determination in her stride. It was flattering, yes, but more than that, it was reassuring. Someone finally saw her for who she truly was. But peace in Redstone Creek was never permanent. As they turned down the lane toward the creek behind Clara's homestead, a familiar voice broke the calm. "Clara, come back here this instant." It was Martha Henderson, a woman whose tongue was sharper than a whip and whose opinions of others' appearances were mercilessly public. She had gathered a small group of townsfolk, all eager to see someone brought low. They murmured among themselves, whispers sharp and venomous, and Clara felt the old sting rise in her chest. Jackson stepped closer, placing a protective hand near her shoulder without touching it, a subtle barrier between her and their cruelty. "Ignore them," he said quietly, his voice low but firm. "They're not worth your time." Clara wanted to retreat, to run back to the safety of her cabin, but Jackson's calm presence anchored her. Instead, she straightened her back, squared her shoulders, and faced them with a quiet dignity that seemed to take them by surprise. "You don't get it," Martha sneered, stepping closer. "People notice these things. She isn't pretty enough. She's—" "Stop," Jackson interrupted, his voice cutting through the crowd like a whip crack. Everyone turned to see him, the tall, rugged stranger standing between Clara and the town's judgment. "Enough of that," he said, eyes blazing. "You're looking at her wrong. She's not defined by your whispers." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, muttering under their breath. Clara felt a rush of gratitude so intense it left her momentarily breathless. Jackson's words were more than defense, they were a declaration. In the midst of their cruelty, someone had seen her, and for the first time, she felt something she had never allowed herself to feel: hope. After the confrontation, they walked in silence toward the creek, the water sparkling in the morning sun. Clara's mind was racing. She couldn't stop thinking about Jackson's eyes, the way he had stood for her, the way his presence seemed to make the world smaller, safer. "You really believe what you said yesterday?" she asked quietly, finally breaking the silence. Jackson smiled, a slow, genuine curve of his lips that seemed to brighten the very air around them. Every word. I see you, Clara. Not the rumors, not the town's whispers, just you. The words made her stomach flutter, and for a moment, the creek itself seemed to shimmer with possibility. But as the morning wore on, Clara realized that danger and hardship were not done with them. The town's whispers would not vanish so easily, and there were those who would not take kindly to Jackson's interference. Later that day, while Clara worked on chores around the homestead, she caught sight of Tommy Briggs, a young ranch hand notorious for stirring trouble. He lingered near the barn, a smirk on his face, clearly aware of the whispered tales he could spread. Clara felt a pang of anxiety, but also a strange determination. She refused to let fear dictate her life anymore. That evening, Jackson arrived at her doorstep, riding in on his horse with a casual confidence that made the world seem just a little less threatening. "Mind if I join you for supper?" he asked. Clara hesitated, then nodded. Together, they sat at the small wooden table, the warmth of the cabin contrasting sharply with the harsh judgments of the town outside. Conversation flowed naturally, laughter breaking through the tension, and Clara felt herself opening in ways she never had before. Jackson asked about her dreams, her hopes, even her fears, and she realized how long it had been since anyone had truly listened. As the night deepened, Clara looked at Jackson and wondered about the path ahead. Redstone Creek would always be full of whispers and judgment, but she no longer felt alone. With Jackson by her side, she could face whatever came. And little did she know, the challenges and adventures ahead would test not only their courage but the bond that was beginning to form between them, a bond that no rumor or whisper could ever destroy. The following days in Redstone Creek carried the usual rhythm of small-town life. Yet for Clara, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every glance from a passerby, every whispered comment, seemed amplified, echoing the judgment she had long carried silently. But Jackson's presence was a constant, quiet anchor. He had taken it upon himself to walk her home after errands, to stand by her side in the square, and even to fetch supplies for her cabin when the work became too much. Each small gesture reminded her that there were those who saw beyond the whispers. One afternoon, as Clara gathered firewood from the edge of the creek, she heard the unmistakable sound of laughter, mocking, cruel, and deliberate. She froze, recognizing the voice of Martha Henderson mingled with several others from the town. They were hiding behind the barn, throwing snide comments her way, their words sharper than any tool she carried. Jackson arrived without warning, boots crunching on the dry earth, and immediately positioned himself between Clara and the group. His hand rested lightly on the butt of his revolver, not a threat, just a reminder that he was ready to defend her if necessary. "They're just words," Jackson said quietly to Clara, reading the tension in her posture. "They can't touch you unless you let them." Clara wanted to believe him. She wanted to step forward and meet their cruelty with defiance, but the weight of years of judgment made her hesitant. Instead, she stood silently, letting Jackson's steady gaze give her courage. "Clara Bennett," Martha sneered, stepping into the open, her eyes narrowing. "Do you really think you're anything special? The whole town knows your place." Jackson's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the air seemed to thrum with unspoken warning. He took a step forward. "Your opinion doesn't matter. She doesn't live by your rules, and neither do I." The group muttered among themselves, taken aback by Jackson's boldness. Clara felt a strange warmth bloom in her chest. For the first time, someone was standing up for her without hesitation, without reservation. The whispers of the town no longer seemed so powerful. As the days went on, Clara and Jackson grew closer. They rode together along the dusty trails outside Redstone Creek, the wind whipping through their hair, laughter echoing against the hills. Jackson shared stories of his travels, tales of distant towns and rugged landscapes, while Clara spoke of her dreams, small ones at first, like painting a scene of the creek or learning to play a tune on the old piano in the cabin. But gradually, her ambitions grew bolder under Jackson's encouragement. Yet, peace was fleeting. One evening, as the sun began its descent, a rider arrived in town with news that unsettled the residents. A neighboring ranch had been raided by rustlers, livestock stolen in the dead of night, and suspicion immediately turned toward anyone considered an outsider. Jackson, known for his reputation as a skilled rider and tracker, found himself under scrutiny. Whispers began again, this time not about Clara, but about him, suggesting he might be involved. Clara felt a surge of protectiveness, anger mingling with fear. "They don't know you like I do," she told him fiercely. "They have no right to judge." Jackson placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll handle this together. Trust me." The following days were tense, with Jackson riding out to investigate, Clara anxiously waiting at the cabin. Their bond grew stronger in that time, not just through romance, but through shared trust, respect, and a mutual sense of justice. Clara began to realize that beauty, real beauty, was never about appearances or the approval of others. It was in courage, integrity, and the willingness to stand for what was right. One evening, after a long day of work around the homestead, Clara found herself gazing across the creek, the water reflecting the deep colors of sunset. Jackson approached quietly, sitting beside her without a word. For a moment, neither spoke. The gentle sound of the water and the distant call of a bird filled the silence. "You know," Clara said softly, "I used to think I had to fit into what everyone expected, that I had to be someone I wasn't just to be liked." Jackson looked at her, his eyes softening. "And now I see," she whispered, "that it doesn't matter what they think. I only have to be me." He smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "And to me, you've always been more than enough." Their quiet moment was interrupted by the distant sound of hooves pounding the trail, a reminder that the outside world never truly rested. Redstone Creek was full of judgment, rumors, and challenges, but together, they felt stronger than anything the town could throw at them. As night fell, Clara went to bed with a sense of hope she hadn't known she could feel. The whispers would not disappear overnight, but for the first time, she felt ready to face them. She was no longer the girl who hid from the world. She was a young woman who had someone by her side willing to see her true worth, someone who believed in her when no one else did. Little did she know, the days ahead would test their courage even further. Obstacles were coming, not just from the town, but from forces neither of them had anticipated. Challenges that would demand more than bravery. They would require trust, sacrifice, and the kind of strength that only grows in the face of adversity. And so, the journey continued. Clara and Jackson, side by side, hearts intertwining in the quiet defiance of a town that refused to see beyond appearances, were about to step into a world that would shape them, challenge them, and ultimately, define them in ways neither could have imagined. A few days later, the quiet rhythm of Redstone Creek was shattered. A rider appeared on the horizon, kicking up dust that glimmered gold in the afternoon sun. The man was frantic, galloping into town with a message that sent the townsfolk scattering with nervous whispers. There had been a string of thefts on the outskirts of the county, cattle, supplies, even a few wagons gone missing, and suspicion quickly fell on anyone who seemed new or unusual, including Jackson. Clara's heart raced as she watched from the porch of her cabin, seeing Jackson dismount and stride into the center of town, calm but alert. The townspeople clustered around him, suspicion etched into their faces. "We don't know if we can trust you," one farmer muttered. "How do we know you aren't behind this?" Jackson's eyes swept over the crowd, steady and unwavering. "I've been tracking these rustlers for weeks," he said, his voice carrying a confidence that silenced the whispers. "And I intend to find them. I'm here to help, not harm." Clara felt a surge of pride. This was the man she had come to trust, the man who saw her when no one else did. And now he was standing up not just for her, but for the town, even as they doubted him. The next morning, Jackson saddled his horse and invited Clara to come with him to the edge of the county, where the tracks of the rustlers had been spotted. She hesitated for only a moment, then nodded. She wasn't willing to sit idly while injustice unfolded. They rode together, wind whipping through their hair, the sun climbing high overhead, casting long shadows across the hills and valleys. As they followed the trail, Clara couldn't help but notice how attuned Jackson was to every detail. The way he examined broken twigs, the prints in the dirt, the way the breeze carried faint sounds of hooves in the distance. His skill, calmness, and attention to detail fascinated her. Here was a man who had faced danger countless times, and yet he remained grounded, strong, and unwavering. Hours passed, and just when Clara's resolve began to waver under the heat of the sun, Jackson halted abruptly. "They're close," he said, pointing to a faint trail leading into a narrow canyon. The two of them dismounted, tying their horses to nearby trees, and continued on foot, silent and alert. Suddenly, the sound of voices echoed from the rocks above. Clara's pulse quickened. A group of rustlers had gathered around stolen cattle, their laughter harsh and mocking. Jackson signaled for her to stay low, crouching behind a boulder. He whispered instructions with precision, showing her how to move quietly, how to stay calm, how to observe without being seen. For Clara, it was a revelation. She realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. And with Jackson by her side, she found herself capable of more than she had ever imagined. The confrontation was tense. Jackson's plan required timing and precision. As the rustlers moved to drive the cattle further along the canyon, he signaled Clara. Together, they moved like shadows, intercepting the rustlers and reclaiming what had been stolen. The rustlers, caught off guard, tried to flee, but Jackson's skill and Clara's steady resolve ensured their capture. By the time they returned to Redstone Creek, the sun was dipping low, painting the town in fiery hues of orange and red. The townsfolk, who had doubted Jackson and whispered against Clara, now watched in awe as he led the captured rustlers into town. Clara felt a mix of triumph and relief, but more than anything, she felt a deep connection to Jackson, forged not just in admiration, but in shared courage and determination. That evening, as they walked together along the creek, Clara allowed herself to speak what she had held close for so long. "I used to think I had to hide," she said, voice soft but resolute. "I thought I had to be smaller, quieter, less noticeable to survive here." Jackson's hand brushed hers, gentle but firm. "And now, she whispered, "I feel seen. And I feel brave." Jackson's eyes softened, reflecting the last rays of sunlight. "You've always been brave, Clara. You just didn't know it yet. And as for being seen, well, that's my job. To see you, truly see you, in a world that often refuses to notice." For the first time, Clara felt a certainty that went beyond words or whispers. She wasn't just beautiful in Jackson's eyes. She was strong, capable, and deserving of trust, love, and respect. And together, they had proven that courage, loyalty, and heart could outshine every shadow of judgment cast by the town. But Redstone Creek had more tests in store. Their bond, fragile and fierce, would face challenges not only from outside threats, but from the complex web of town politics, old rivalries, and secrets long buried. Clara knew their journey was far from over. Yet with Jackson by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. As night fell over the creek, the stars twinkling above like scattered diamonds, Clara leaned against Jackson, feeling the steady beat of his heart. The whispers of the town might never fully fade, but for the first time, she realized that being seen and being loved for who she truly was far more powerful than any rumor or judgment. And so, their story continued, a tale of courage, trust, and a love that refused to be silenced, even in the face of doubt and adversity. The days following the capture of the rustlers brought a strange mix of relief and unease to Redstone Creek. While the town no longer whispered about Jackson's involvement with crime, subtle glances and quiet murmurs lingered, a reminder that not everyone could easily set aside suspicion. Clara noticed it most in the market square, where some townsfolk would smile politely, then quickly turn away, as though unsure whether to trust her presence alongside Jackson. Clara, however, had grown stronger. The experience of confronting danger had shifted something deep within her, a newfound confidence, a quiet pride that came from facing fear and standing tall. And Jackson, ever watchful, seemed to notice these small changes, his approving glances a balm against the lingering judgment. One morning, as Clara was tending to the chickens, a rider approached at a steady trot. It was Sheriff Dalton, a stern man whose expression rarely softened. He dismounted carefully, tipping his hat. "Jackson Cole," he asked, "I need a word with you." Jackson looked toward Clara, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "I'll be back soon," he said, squeezing her hand reassuringly before following the sheriff toward the town office. Left alone, Clara felt a familiar flutter of anxiety, but she refused to let it take hold. She busied herself with chores, all the while wondering what the sheriff could want. When Jackson returned a few hours later, his face was tense but calm, his jaw set with determination. "They want me to help track another group," he explained. "More rustlers, farther out toward the hills. They're causing problems for multiple ranches. I plan to leave at first light." Clara's heart sank. She didn't want him to leave, not after everything they had been through together. But she also knew that Jackson had a sense of duty, a code he lived by that she respected deeply. "I understand," she said softly. "Be careful." Jackson took her hand, brushing his thumb across her knuckles. "Always," he said. "And you, stay safe. Don't let anyone's whispers make you doubt yourself." That night, Clara sat by the creek, the water reflecting the fading light. She thought about Jackson's words, about the courage she had discovered within herself, and about the bond forming between them. The town might continue to judge, but she was learning to stand independent of their opinions. As the days stretched into weeks, Jackson's absences became more frequent, each one testing Clara's patience and fortitude. Letters were scarce, and when he returned, exhaustion lined his face. Yet he never failed to greet her with the same warmth and attention as before. Together, they began to share stolen moments, walks along the creek, quiet dinners by candlelight, and conversations that lingered long into the night. It was during one of these evenings that Clara realized just how deeply she had come to care for him. The way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the subtle strength in his voice, and the unwavering support he offered had grown into something that transcended friendship. She felt seen, understood, and cherished in a way that no rumor, no judgment could ever diminish. But peace remained elusive. One afternoon, a newcomer arrived in Redstone Creek, a man with sharp features and a calculating gaze. He introduced himself as Elias Ward, claiming to be a businessman with interest in the surrounding ranches. Clara immediately felt a tension in the air, a sense that his intentions were not entirely honorable. Jackson, ever perceptive, noticed it as well, his hand brushing against his revolver beneath his coat whenever the man approached. Elias took a particular interest in Clara, complimenting her in ways that felt insincere, too smooth, and slightly unsettling. The town, always eager for drama, whispered once again, questioning Jackson's ability to protect her and subtly implying that Clara might be tempted by the newcomer's charm. Clara, however, had grown stronger. She didn't let Elias's words or gestures unsettle her, though the unease in her stomach reminded her that danger could come in many forms, not just rustlers and thieves. And Jackson, sensing the shift, became more protective without being overbearing, guiding Clara with a steady hand, always respectful of her independence. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Elias cornered Clara near the creek, his intentions clearer than ever. "You shouldn't let yourself be tied to someone like him," he said, voice smooth and persuasive. "You deserve more than this quiet life, more than a man who's always gone chasing trouble." Clara looked him in the eye, her voice calm but firm. "I know my own heart," she said, "and it belongs to someone who sees me for who I am, not for what I might be in your eyes." Elias smirked, sensing resistance, but before he could respond further, Jackson arrived, his horse's hooves striking the dirt with authority. He dismounted quickly, eyes flashing with protective intensity. Without a word, he stood beside Clara, a silent warning to anyone who might think of challenging her safety. Clara felt a wave of gratitude and relief. Together, they had become stronger, more resilient. The whispers of Redstone Creek no longer held the power they once did, not when faced with courage, loyalty, and the unwavering bond between them. That night, as they walked back to the cabin, Jackson finally spoke, his voice low and intimate. "You've grown so strong, Clara, and every day, I'm more certain that nothing in this town, or anywhere else, can take away what we have." Clara leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and for the first time, she let herself believe in a future where whispers no longer mattered, where love and trust were the only things that truly counted. But even as they embraced, the shadows of the town and the challenges of the surrounding lands loomed on the horizon. Their journey was far from over. Obstacles awaited, and the bond they had forged would soon be tested in ways neither could yet imagine. Yet for now, in the quiet glow of the evening, Clara and Jackson allowed themselves a rare, precious moment of peace, the first of many they would claim together amidst the trials ahead. The following morning, Redstone Creek woke to an uneasy quiet. Clara had barely slept, her mind restless with thoughts of Elias Ward and the subtle unease he brought into their lives. Though Jackson had stayed by her side, guiding and protecting her, the tension in the air felt almost tangible, as if the town itself held its breath in anticipation of trouble. By mid-morning, news arrived that unsettled even the most stoic townsfolk. A shipment of supplies bound for neighboring ranches had been ambushed, and suspicion immediately fell on anyone traveling near the hills: outsiders, wanderers, and yes, even Jackson Cole. Clara felt a pang of fear. Once again, Jackson's reputation and intentions were being questioned, and this time the danger felt closer, sharper, more personal. Jackson approached the cabin with a steady gait, his face set in that familiar, determined expression. "I've tracked the trail," he said quietly. "They're moving fast, but I can intercept them before they reach the next settlement. I need you to stay here, Clara." Clara shook her head, a stubborn fire igniting in her chest. "I'm not hiding anymore. I can help. I've learned more in the last few weeks than I ever imagined possible. I won't sit idle while danger approaches." Jackson studied her, a mixture of admiration and concern in his eyes. "I can't promise this will be easy," he said. "It's risky, but if you're certain, I'll have you by my side." Together, they mounted their horses and followed the trail into the hills, the wind whipping against their faces and carrying the scent of dust and distant pine. Clara felt a thrill of adrenaline mixed with fear, her heart pounding as they moved silently through the rugged terrain. Every snapping twig and shifting shadow made her pulse quicken, but with Jackson near, she felt steady, capable, ready. Hours passed as they tracked the rustlers, moving with careful precision. Jackson's skill and instinct guided them, and Clara's newfound courage allowed her to follow instructions, notice details, and anticipate movements. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing moment, forged not just by proximity, but by trust and shared resolve. Finally, as the sun began its descent, they spotted the group of rustlers camped near a narrow canyon, the stolen livestock tethered nearby. Jackson signaled Clara to stay low, and together they approached under the cover of shadows. The tension was electric, every sound amplified, every movement deliberate. Suddenly, one of the rustlers glanced up, spotting them. A shout rang out, and chaos erupted. Horses whinnied, the rustlers scrambled, and Clara's heart leapt in her chest. But she didn't falter. Following Jackson's lead, she moved swiftly, helping to secure the cattle and block the rustlers' escape. In the midst of the commotion, a rustler lunged toward Clara, but Jackson intercepted him just in time. The two men grappled briefly, and Clara, despite fear clawing at her, found the courage to act. She grabbed a nearby rope and helped tie the man down, her hands shaking but her resolve unbroken. When the dust settled, the rustlers were captured and the livestock accounted for. Clara and Jackson stood side by side, breathing heavily, adrenaline still coursing through their veins. The experience had been terrifying, but it had also solidified their connection in a way that words never could. As they rode back toward Redstone Creek, the sky ablaze with the colors of sunset, Clara looked at Jackson, a mixture of awe and gratitude in her eyes. I never thought I could do something like that," she admitted. Jackson smiled, his hand brushing against hers. You were never incapable, Clara. You just needed someone to show you what you already had inside. Courage, strength, and a heart that refuses to be silenced. Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest, deeper than anything she had experienced before. For the first time, she truly understood that beauty was not measured by appearances or the approval of others. It was measured by bravery, integrity, and the willingness to stand for what was right. But even as they returned to the town, Clara knew their challenges were far from over. The whispers of Redstone Creek, the judgment of those who clung to outdated ideas, and the looming presence of Elias Ward all threatened to disrupt the fragile peace they had begun to build. That night, as they sat together on the porch of the cabin, Jackson finally broke the comfortable silence. Clara, whatever happens next, we face it together. Nothing in this town, no one's opinion, and no danger can take away what we share if we remain true to ourselves. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart and the unwavering strength in his embrace. Together, she echoed, her voice barely more than a whisper, but full of conviction. No matter what. And in the quiet glow of the night, with the stars twinkling above and the soft rustle of the creek in the background, Clara realized that she was no longer a girl defined by whispers and judgment. She was a young woman strong enough to face danger, wise enough to recognize true value, and brave enough to love fearlessly. Yet the road ahead remained uncertain. New trials, both subtle and overt, were waiting beyond the horizon. But for now, they had each other, and that, Clara decided, was enough to face whatever came next. The days that followed were tense, though Redstone Creek tried its best to maintain a veneer of calm. The capture of the rustlers had earned Jackson the grudging respect of many townsfolk, but there were still those who whispered behind closed doors, questioning his intentions and subtly undermining Clara at every opportunity. Clara felt it keenly. The judgment that had haunted her for years lingered like a shadow, and even though she had grown braver, there were moments when doubt crept in. She would walk past the general store and hear a quiet chuckle or a low murmur, and a flicker of old insecurities threatened to rise. But Jackson's presence remained her anchor, a constant reminder that she was seen for who she truly was, not the version painted by rumors. One afternoon, as she returned from gathering herbs near the edge of town, she noticed a crowd forming around the saloon. Curiosity pulled her closer, and her heart sank as she recognized Elias Ward at the center, speaking to the townsfolk in a way that seemed both smooth and sinister. Jackson appeared beside her silently, slipping his hand into hers, a subtle yet reassuring gesture. "Don't let him get to you," he murmured, his gaze steady on the crowd. "We know the truth. That's what matters." Elias, noticing Clara, smiled in a way that made her skin crawl. "Ah, Clara Bennett," he said, his voice oily and deliberate. "Still clinging to this cowboy, are you? Don't you think you deserve something more refined?" Clara's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, Jackson stepped forward, his tall frame casting a shadow that seemed to command attention. "Back off, Ward," he said, his voice low but firm. "Clara answers to no one but herself, and she doesn't need your approval." A murmur ran through the crowd. Elias's charming demeanor faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "We'll see about that," he muttered before stepping back, his eyes lingering on Clara with a possessive, calculating look. Clara exhaled slowly, feeling her pulse return to normal. Jackson squeezed her hand gently. "You handled that well," he said quietly. "Proud of you." She smiled, the warmth of his praise settling into her chest. "I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, Jackson and Clara rode out toward the hills, a routine they had begun to cherish. A space where the town's judgment could not follow, where only the wind and the open land surrounded them. The ride was peaceful at first, the kind of quiet that allowed them to speak in whispers and share thoughts they had not voiced before. Clara found herself opening up about her fears, her dreams, and the lingering doubts that sometimes haunted her despite her newfound strength. Jackson listened, patient and attentive, never interrupting, never dismissing. "You know," he said finally, "it's not just about courage or skill in the face of danger. True strength comes from knowing who you are and standing firm, even when the world tries to push you down." Clara glanced at him, the soft glow of the sunset catching in his stormy eyes. "I think I'm beginning to understand that," she whispered. "Being seen, being trusted, that's more powerful than any approval from the town." Jackson's hand brushed hers, their fingers entwining naturally. "And I'll always see you," he said, voice barely more than a murmur. "No matter what anyone says or does." For a long moment, they rode in silence, hearts beating in quiet unison, the tension of the past weeks easing into a gentle rhythm. Yet Clara could feel the weight of what was coming. Elias Ward had not yet given up, and the town's lingering judgment would not fade overnight. Days later, the tension erupted in a way neither of them had anticipated. A fire broke out on the outskirts of Redstone Creek, smoke rising into the sky like a dark omen. The blaze threatened the homes of several families, and panic spread through the town like wildfire itself. Without hesitation, Jackson mounted his horse, Clara following closely behind. They rode into the flames, helping to guide frightened townsfolk to safety and coordinating efforts to contain the fire. The heat, the smoke, the chaos. It was unlike anything Clara had experienced. Yet through it all, she moved with purpose, following Jackson's lead, her courage ignited by the danger around her. As they worked, Clara realized just how much she had changed. The girl who once cowered under whispers and judgment was gone. In her place stood a young woman who could face fire, danger, and malice with steady hands and a brave heart. And beside her, Jackson remained constant, a steady force of protection and trust. By the time the fire was finally under control, the town had been saved from the worst, and Clara and Jackson stood together, breathing heavily, soot and ash clinging to their clothes. The townsfolk, once whispering behind closed doors, now looked upon them with respect and quiet admiration. Jackson turned to Clara, a small, proud smile on his lips. "See, you're stronger than you know," he said, voice gentle but certain. Clara met his gaze, feeling a swell of emotion she could barely contain. "And I'm not afraid anymore," she replied. "Not of them, not of the whispers, and not of facing whatever comes next." As night fell over Redstone Creek, stars glittering in the clear sky, Clara understood that the town's judgment could no longer hold power over her. With Jackson by her side, she could face anything, rumor, danger, or challenge. And together, they were unstoppable, a force of courage, trust, and unwavering love, ready to face whatever trials lay ahead. The following week brought an uneasy calm to Redstone Creek. The fire had left its mark, the scorched earth a reminder of how fragile safety could be, yet life had resumed its rhythm. Still, Clara felt a gnawing sense of anticipation, a quiet knowing that the town's challenges were far from over. Jackson, too, carried a tension beneath his calm exterior, the subtle set of his jaw betraying a mind already calculating the next steps. It all began one late afternoon, as the sky bled shades of gold and crimson, when a rider appeared on the ridge above the town. The silhouette was unmistakable, Elias Ward. But he was not alone. Behind him rode a small group of men, faces hidden beneath scarves and hats, their intentions clear in the way they surveyed the town below. Clara's stomach tightened. She had hoped he had moved on, that the danger had ended, but now it was impossible to ignore. Jackson spotted the group at the same moment and nudged Clara's horse forward, positioning them near the edge of the ridge for a better view. "They're planning something," he murmured, eyes scanning the riders. "And it won't be subtle." Clara's hands clenched the reins, heart hammering. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear rising inside her. Jackson's eyes softened as he looked at her. "We face it together, just like always." The threat descended quickly. Elias and his men rode into the town, creating chaos as they went, trying to intimidate the townsfolk and assert control. Shouts rang out, windows rattled, and horses reared in panic. Clara's first instinct was fear, but but she reminded herself of the lessons she had learned. Courage was not the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it. Jackson moved with precision, guiding Clara through the chaos, keeping her close, ensuring she remained safe. They coordinated quietly, rounding up frightened townsfolk, helping them find shelter, and confronting Elias's men when they tried to block their path. At the center of the commotion, Elias sought Clara out, his eyes narrowing as he caught sight of her. "You shouldn't have sided with him," he hissed, spurring his horse closer. Clara met his gaze without flinching. "I choose who I stand with," she said firmly. "And that choice is clear." Jackson appeared beside her in an instant, revolver in hand, a protective wall between her and the threat. "Leave her alone, Ward," he said, voice low but unwavering. "You're done here." Elias laughed, a harsh, bitter sound, and spurred his horse forward, attempting to intimidate Jackson. But Jackson's experience and skill quickly neutralized the threat. With Clara moving swiftly to assist, guiding townsfolk to safety, and helping subdue the men who tried to escape, the tide turned against Elias and his gang. By the time the sun touched the horizon, the threat had been fully neutralized. Elias Ward was restrained and brought before the town, his smooth charm replaced with frustration and disbelief. The townsfolk, once quick to judge, now looked at Clara and Jackson with admiration and respect, realizing the depth of their courage and the strength of their bond. Clara stood beside Jackson, the dust and heat of the day clinging to her, but she felt a sense of triumph deeper than any physical exhaustion. She had faced fear, stood tall against judgment, and proven not only to the town but to herself that she was capable of strength, bravery, and leadership. Jackson turned to her, his face illuminated by the fading light. "You were incredible today," he said, voice full of pride and admiration. "I've always known you had this strength inside you, but seeing it, it's something else entirely." Clara's heart swelled. "I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted softly. "You've taught me what it means to stand firm, to trust, and to be seen." Jackson smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "And I'll keep seeing you, Clara, every day, in every moment, through every challenge. You're more than anyone could ever doubt. You're beauty to me, in courage, in heart, and in spirit." For the first time in her life, Clara truly understood what it meant to be seen, valued, and loved. The whispers of Redstone Creek, the judgment of townsfolk, and the interference of outsiders no longer had the power to define her. She was strong, capable, and cherished, not just for appearances, but for the very essence of who she was. As night settled over the town, Clara and Jackson walked side by side through the quiet streets, the stars shining above like distant witnesses to their triumph. Though the challenges of the world were far from over, and Redstone Creek would continue to test them in subtle ways, they had faced the greatest threat together and had emerged stronger, unshaken, and more connected than ever. In that moment, Clara realized that true beauty was not measured by approval or whispers, but by courage, integrity, and love that refused to falter. And with Jackson by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next, confident that no shadow, no danger, and no whisper could ever diminish the light that had finally been recognized and cherished. The morning after the confrontation, Redstone Creek felt like a town waking from a long, tense dream. Smoke and dust still clung to the streets, the scent of yesterday's chaos lingering in the air. Windows rattled from the heat, and the ground bore faint hoof prints and trampled earth where horses had raced in panic. Yet beneath it all, a quiet had settled, the sort that follows a storm, uneasy but promising relief. The townsfolk began to move with cautious purpose, tending to the tasks left undone, repairing fences, checking on their families, and exchanging wary glances with one another. Clara walked through the town square, her boots crunching against the dusty ground. The weight of the previous weeks, the fear, the whispers, the judgment, felt different now, lighter somehow. The fire had scorched the outskirts, the rustlers had been captured, and Elias Ward was restrained, humiliated, and powerless. And yet, The town still carried its undercurrent of doubt and cautious scrutiny. Clara had felt those whispers following her for years, whispers about her looks, her quiet nature, her supposed inadequacies. For a long time, they had shaped her every step, made her shrink from the world. Now, she moved through the square with her head held high, not because she was unafraid of the whispers, but because she had learned that their power could not touch her when she stood with Jackson by her side. Every glance, every nod of acknowledgement, every murmured approval felt different now, not because the town had completely changed, but because she had. She had discovered a strength she had never known she possessed, and it radiated outward in subtle ways, even to those still unsure of her worth. Jackson was nearby, speaking quietly with Sheriff Dalton as they ensured the town's safety, his calm demeanor belying the intensity of his vigilance. When he spotted Clara, his face softened, and he walked toward her with the familiar, steady stride that always seemed to calm her racing heart. "You did well," he said softly, taking her hand in his. "Yesterday, you faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, and you never faltered." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest, but also a sense of humility. "We did it together," she replied. "I couldn't have done any of it alone." Jackson's eyes, stormy yet soft, held hers. "And that's exactly why I want you to understand something. You've always had this strength, Clara. Courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about acting even when fear threatens to paralyze you. Yesterday, today, and every day after, I see that in you. You are more than you know." They walked side by side toward the creek, the familiar place that had become their sanctuary. The gentle rush of water over smooth stones, the rustle of leaves, and the soft whisper of the wind through the tall grass created a space where judgment and whispers could not reach. Here, in this quiet, Clara felt free, not just from the town's scrutiny, but from the self-doubt that had haunted her for so long. "You know," she said softly, breaking the silence, "I never thought I'd feel seen. Truly seen. Not just for appearances, but for who I am. And not just by you, Jackson, but by myself too." Jackson's hand brushed hers, his thumb moving slowly over the back of her hand. "You've always deserved to be seen, Clara. I've just been lucky enough to be the one who could help you see it too." A quiet smile played on her lips. "I feel like the girl who used to hide is gone," she admitted. "The one who let whispers and judgment define her. The one who feared being noticed. She's not me anymore." Jackson's gaze softened, full of admiration and affection. "Good. Because the woman I see now is incredible, brave, strong, and unwavering. You've faced the town, danger, and yourself, and came out standing taller than ever." The creek shimmered in the late morning light as they settled on a smooth rock by the water, the cool breeze carrying the scent of pine and fresh earth. Clara leaned her head against Jackson's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart beneath her ear. She thought of the fire, the rustlers, Elias Ward, and the long weeks of tension that had tested every ounce of her courage. And now, looking at the man who had stood beside her through every challenge, she realized that her life had changed forever. Jackson spoke after a long pause, his voice quiet but firm. "Clara, whatever comes next, we face it together. There's no obstacle too great, no threat too dangerous, and no judgment too harsh when we stand side by side. What we've built, this trust, this bond, is stronger than anything else in this town. Stronger than the whispers, stronger than the fear." Clara lifted her gaze to meet his, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I believe you," she whispered, "and I believe in us. No one can take this away." The day stretched into evening, and they remained by the creek, watching the sun dip behind the hills. The townsfolk's voices grew distant, the faint sound of their activities blending with the soft gurgle of the water. Clara felt a profound sense of peace, a clarity she had never known. She could see now that beauty and worth were not defined by approval or appearances, but by courage, integrity, and the love and respect of those who truly mattered. Over the following days, life in Redstone Creek began to regain a rhythm. The townsfolk repaired fences, tended to crops, and gradually moved past their initial judgment. While some still whispered, The tone had shifted from ridicule to respect. Clara noticed the subtle nods, the polite greetings, and the growing acknowledgement of her role in protecting the town. It was not a transformation of the town itself, but of her place within it, and she carried it with quiet dignity. Jackson and Clara continued their rides along the hills and valleys surrounding Redstone Creek, sharing long, intimate conversations that deepened their understanding of one another. They spoke of dreams, small and large, practical and fanciful, and began to imagine a future together, one built not on appearances or whispered approval, but on shared values, trust, and unshakable love. One evening, as they watched the stars appear in the clear night sky, Clara finally spoke the words she had carried for so long. "Jackson, I think I understand what it means to be truly beautiful," she said, her voice soft yet certain. "It's not how I look or what others say. It's how I act, what I stand for, and who I love and trust. I feel beautiful now, not because someone said it, but because I know it, and because you see it in me." Jackson's hand found hers again, fingers entwining naturally. "And I will always see it, Clara. Every day, your beauty to me, in everything you do, in every act of courage, in every heartbeat. You are more than enough, and you always have been." Clara's heart swelled, tears of relief and joy welling in her eyes. "And I feel seen, Jackson, truly seen, for the first time in my life." Together, they sat in silence, the quiet of the creek and the night surrounding them, allowing themselves a rare, unbroken moment of peace. The trials of Redstone Creek, the fire, the rustlers, Elias Ward, and the whispers, had tested them in ways neither could have anticipated. And yet, they had emerged stronger, their bond deeper, and their understanding of courage and love more profound than ever. Clara knew the challenges of life would continue. They always did. But with Jackson by her side, she felt ready for anything. She had faced fear, judgment, and danger, and had discovered within herself a strength that could not be shaken. And she had discovered something even more profound, the power of being seen and cherished for who she truly was. As the night deepened and the stars glimmered above like distant guardians, Clara and Jackson rose, walking back toward the cabin hand in hand. The whispers of the town were now a distant echo, powerless against the bond forged in fire, courage, and trust. And as they stepped across the familiar threshold of the cabin, Clara felt a certainty she had never known before. She was no longer defined by what others thought. She was defined by courage, by love, and by the unshakable knowledge that she was seen and cherished for exactly who she was. The first light of dawn broke over Redstone Creek, painting the town in soft hues of gold and pink. Clara stood on the porch of the cabin, the morning breeze ruffling her hair, and watched as the town slowly came to life. Children laughed in the streets, vendors called out their wares, and the distant sound of horses' hooves echoed along the dirt roads. It was a peaceful morning, one that felt almost surreal after the chaos of recent days, the fire, the rustlers, Elias Ward, and the tension that had gripped the town like a heavy shadow. Yet despite the calm, Clara felt a steady hum of anticipation beneath her skin. The past weeks had changed her. She had faced fear, danger, and judgment, and emerged stronger, more confident, and unshakably sure of her worth. The whispers that had haunted her childhood and early days in Redstone Creek no longer held power over her. She had learned that true beauty, courage, and strength were not measured by the opinions of others, but by the integrity of one's actions and the depth of one's heart. Jackson appeared beside her, the familiar sound of his boots on the wooden porch bringing a comforting rhythm to her thoughts. He stood silently for a moment, taking in the sunrise, before turning his gaze to her. His eyes softened as he smiled. "Morning, Clara," he said quietly. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Clara returned the smile, a quiet warmth spreading through her chest. "It is," she replied. "And somehow, it feels different now. Lighter." Jackson nodded, stepping closer and taking her hand. "It should. You've earned that feeling. You've faced every trial with courage, and you've proven yourself, not just to the town, but to yourself." I couldn't be prouder of you. Her heart swelled at his words. I couldn't have done it without you, she admitted. You've shown me what it means to be seen, to be trusted, and to be loved for who I truly am. Jackson's thumb brushed over the back of her hand, a tender gesture filled with unspoken emotion. And I'll continue to show you that every day, Clara, through every challenge, every trial, every quiet moment. You are my heart, my partner, and the person I'll always stand by. You are beauty to me, not just for appearances, but for everything you are inside and out. A small laugh escaped her, one of pure joy and relief. I never thought I'd hear that and truly believe it, she said, her voice soft yet certain. But now, I do. I finally do. Jackson's hand found hers fully, fingers entwining naturally, as if they were always meant to fit together that way. Good, he said, a playful glint in his stormy eyes. Because we've got a lot of life ahead of us, and I intend to see every moment with you. Clara leaned into him, feeling the steady strength of his presence. The town, with all its judgment and whispers, had taught her lessons she could never have learned otherwise. And now, standing beside the man who had guided her through fear, danger, and uncertainty, she felt a freedom she had never known. She was no longer the girl who hid in the shadows, doubting her worth. She was a woman who faced life head-on, confident in her courage and in the love that had blossomed between her and Jackson. Over the next few days, the town of Redstone Creek slowly adjusted to a new rhythm. The townsfolk who had once whispered behind closed doors began to offer quiet smiles, respectful nods, and genuine acknowledgement of Clara and Jackson's bravery. Some still looked on with caution, but their glances no longer carried the weight of scorn. They were tempered by recognition, and in some cases, admiration. Clara and Jackson continued their rides through the hills and valleys, exploring the land around the town that had become both their home and their proving ground. Each ride was a shared adventure, an opportunity to revel in the quiet moments of companionship, laughter, and understanding. They spoke of dreams, simple dreams of a life together, tending to a small ranch, perhaps raising a family one day. And in every conversation, Clara felt the bond between them deepen, a connection forged not in fleeting romance, but in mutual respect, courage, and trust. One afternoon, as they rode along a ridge overlooking the town, Clara spoke, her voice soft but reflective. You know, Jackson, I used to worry so much about what people thought of me. I let their whispers shape my every move. But now, I see that it doesn't matter. What matters is what we do, how we live, and who stands with us. Jackson's eyes softened as he looked at her. Exactly. And the person who stands with you, who sees you, and who values you. That's what counts. Everything else is just noise. Clara leaned against him as they continued their ride, feeling the wind on her face, the warmth of the sun, and the quiet thrill of freedom. In that moment, she realized that courage was not just about facing danger. It was about trusting oneself, embracing love without hesitation, and refusing to let the judgments of others define your worth. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink, gold, and purple, Clara and Jackson returned to the cabin. They sat together on the porch, watching the town settle into the calm of night. Stars began to twinkle overhead, scattered like tiny diamonds across the darkening sky, each one a silent witness to their journey. Jackson reached for Clara's hand once more, holding it tightly. We've faced a lot, he said, voice low and intimate. But every trial, every challenge, it's only made us stronger. And I promise, no matter what comes next, we face it together. Clara looked up at him, tears of joy and relief welling in her eyes. Together, she echoed, her voice full of conviction. No matter what, the town, the dangers, the whispers, they don't define us anymore. We do, Jackson smiled, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. Exactly. And you've proven to me that bravery, kindness, and love will always shine brighter than any shadow of doubt. For a long moment, they sat in quiet contentment, the world around them calm, the creek softly burbling nearby, and the stars above bearing witness to the life they had fought for and earned. Clara realized that this was more than a victory over external threats. It was a triumph over fear, judgment, and self-doubt. She had discovered the strength to stand tall, the courage to love fearlessly, and the joy of being truly seen. As the night deepened and the town of Redstone Creek settled into peaceful slumber, Clara and Jackson rose, hand in hand, walking through the quiet streets toward the small cabin that had become their sanctuary. Each step was steady, confident, and free from the weight of judgment. They had faced fire, betrayal, danger, and whispers, and had emerged stronger, braver, and more united than ever before. Clara looked up at Jackson, her heart full. This is everything I've ever wanted," she said softly. "To be seen, to be brave, and to be with someone who truly understands me." Jackson's gaze softened, his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles. "And you have it, Clara. You've earned it, and we'll keep it, together, always." As they reached the cabin, the soft glow of lanterns illuminated their path, casting long shadows that seemed to dance alongside them. They stepped inside, closing the door behind them, and in that quiet, intimate space, the world outside faded. There was no judgment, no fear, no danger, only the warmth of love, the strength of trust, and the certainty of belonging. Clara knew that life would continue to bring challenges. Redstone Creek would still whisper, dangers might still appear, and the world would test their courage. But now, with Jackson by her side, she felt ready for anything. The trials they had faced had forged a bond unbreakable, a love that could withstand fear, judgment, and the passing of time. As they stood together, silhouetted against the soft glow of the cabin's lanterns, Clara felt a profound peace settle over her. She had discovered the truth she had longed for, that true beauty, courage, and strength were measured not by the eyes of others, but by the heart, the actions, and the love one carries. And in Jackson's eyes, she was seen fully, cherished completely, and loved without reservation. With the night surrounding them, the stars above twinkling like distant witnesses, Clara realized that she had finally found her place in the world, not defined by whispers, not constrained by judgment, but standing tall, fearless, and embraced by the unwavering love of the man who had always seen her as she truly was. And in that moment, Redstone Creek, with all its trials and whispers, became not a place of judgment but a home, a place where courage, love, and beauty had been proven victorious, and where Clara and Jackson would continue their life together, unshakable, united, and free.